All right, we're on Zoom, we're good. All right, Rabbi, say good morning and a good night. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud store sponsors for the month of Nisan, to thank Jerry and Appy Applebaum for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month in memory of Basya Bas Chaim and David Ben Avram. Doctors Paul and Linda Weinberg, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Mordechai Yehoshua, Ben Peretz Moshe Valeah Miriam, Paul and Kathy Pollack and the Schus of Refuah Shlema for Donna Baker Mattson, Stephen Terry Zinn, in gratitude to Hashem for their grandson, Bunim Tzi Hirsch Zinn, Naftali Tilson, with thanks to his chaver Benjamin Wallen for the whole shir, Echad Kosher V'Sameach, and Avram and Shane D. Kelman in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Bernice Kelman Sarah Braina Bas Yoshua Heschel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamas Sahav and Aliyah, the families Ein Nechama. And indeed, in Meretz Hashem should be a Chag Kosher V'Sameach for all of us. Well, so with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Mem Gimel. We are picking up on Mem Beis Amud Beis 42b, 20 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, in the end of yesterday's shir, we were focusing on the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said that halacha follows Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah said that after a woman leaves a marriage, divorce, death of her husband, whatever it may be, halacha l'maisa, she is permitted to go ahead and engage in erisin immediately. Because remember again, there's no concern according to Rabbi Yossi, there's no concern about erisin because she's not living with her new husband. So there's no concern that she may become pregnant. So therefore, erisin is permitted immediately. He said with one exception. The exception was an almana. Right, because by an almana, by a widow, since there's a din of avelos, a din of mourning, therefore halacha l'maisa, again, she can't get married until after the 30 days shloshim. But otherwise, erisin is permitted immediately. So the Gemara says now, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba chazar bar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan retracted this position. Amar Rabbi Yosef, if Rabbi Yochanan indeed retracted this position, mimas nisin de karma hadrabe. He must have gone ahead and retracted from a Mishnah which was stated in the vineyard. And I will say the vineyard, of course, is a reference to the Beis Medrash in Yavne, which became known as the Kerem B'Yavne, because like a vineyard, because the way that the rows and the benches were situated in the Beis Medrash, it looked like a vineyard, quite beautiful. Tisanya, Amar Rabbi Shmuel Benosh Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, said as follows. Shamati mipi chachamim b'kerem b'yavne. I heard from the chachamim in Kerem b'Yavne. Kulan tzrichos lahamtin shlosha chadoshim. And I heard that in the Beis Medrash they said every woman coming off of a relationship, be it death, divorce, has to wait 3 months before going ahead and getting involved in any stage of marriage. Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zreika, ki ha'ilisa l'kamid Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Lei, when you come before Rabbi Avo, go ahead and pose this contradiction to him. Mi amar Rabbi Yochanan halach Rabbi Yossi. Did Rabbi Yochanan actually say that the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi? V'amar Rabbi Yochanan said, halacha kistam mishnah. I will say, in general, we have a concept that a halacha follows a stam mishnah, which means when you have a mishnah without attribution, we assume that that mishnah is authoritative. Because since it's a stam, since there's no attribution and there's no machlokas, it sounds like that is the majority opinion. Utzinan, and we learned, Kol anoshim lo yinasu lo yisarsu ad shulam shlosha chadashim. And yet, what does the Stam Mishnah say? The Stam Mishnah says all women should not go ahead and do nisuin or erisin until they have 3 months from the conclusion of their previous marriage. Achos besulos, achos beulos. So I will say that's a Stam Mishnah. Again, there's no attribution there. There's no machlokes there. So at the end of the day, it would seem to be that is authoritative. Amar lei, derama lechaha lo chash lekimche. So obviously, listen to this. He said to him, whoever told this to you did not properly grind their wheat. And I will say that phrase, that expression of not properly grinding your wheat is today the equivalent of not thinking before you speak. Right? So whoever said this didn't properly grind his wheat. And I will say, you know what happens if you don't properly grind your wheat? Everyone knows what happens if you don't properly grind your wheat, right? You get like chunks of kernels and things, as opposed to fine flour. The idea is actually it's a very profound metaphor. It's the same way that if I don't think before I speak, so often again there are things that come out that are unrefined. There are things that come out that are not properly ground up and thought over. A person has to think long and hard before what they say and how they say it. Failure to do so is like failure to properly grind your wheat. You end up with impurities. You end up with a lack of refined product. Incredible yisod. Stam v'achar malchokesi, because we'll say this is not just a stam mishnah. This is not any stam mishnah. This is what's called a stam v'achar machlokes. The Rabbi say this is actually very interesting. In other words, we're gonna talk about this a little bit. But you could have a concept of a stam mishnah, right? The stam mishnah, which, as it sounds, a mishnah without attribution, but also without any dispute. And then there's machlokes ultimately again afterwards. So what's the halacha when you have a stam v'achar kach machlokes? Ve'in halacha kistam. So say whenever you have a stam mishnah, and then again a same topic but in a machlokes in another mishnah, the halacha does not follow the stam mishnah. Machlokes v'achar kach stam. If you have a machlokes and then afterwards a stam mishnah, halacha kistam. The halacha follows the stam mishnah. Stam v'achar kach machlokes, but if you have a stam mishnah and then a machlokes afterwards, ein halacha kistam. Ultimately, the halacha does not follow the stam mishnah. Okay, we'll say just these are important. Like I'm not going to call this like exegetical principles because they're not exegetical, but lamaisa they are important principles which teach us how to go ahead and learn halacha lamaisa from different texts. Listen to this. Rabbi Yavo was resting on the shoulder of Rabbi Nachum, his attendant. Right. So first you have to imagine the scene. Right, so Rabbi Yavo requiring assistance, resting on the shoulder of Rabbi Nachum. Mankit va'azal hilchasa minei. So listen to the lashon here. Rabbi Nachum was going ahead and collecting halachic rulings from him. In other words, Rabbi Nachum said like this: if my Rebbe is leaning on my shoulder, this is an incredible opportunity to go ahead and learn from him. So he was asking him questions and collecting rulings from. We'll say the scene itself is so beautiful that when Jews lean on one another, when we support one another, more Torah and more Kedusha comes from that. So Rabbi Nachum is supporting his Rebbe. And as a result of that, again, so ultimately Torah comes from that exchange. He goes on, he says, he asked him the following question. Machlokes v'achar kach stam mai. What happens if you have two mishnayos? One is a machlokes, the second is a stam mishnah. What's the halacha? Amrle, halacha kistam. The halacha follows the stam mishnah. I stam v'achar kach machlokes. What happens if it's a stam mishnah and then a machlokes? So my amrle in halacha kistam. The halacha doesn't follow the stam. So we'll say so. Apparently, what comes out is like this: that halacha lemaisa. When you have two mishnayos, one a stam, one a machlokes. So apparently, who does the halacha follow? Whichever one is what? Last. Whichever one is last. The last one is considered to be the most authoritative. Okay, so the Gemara says, what about this? What happens if you have a stam mishnah, which means again about say mishnah without attribution, which sounds like it's the widely held opinion, umachlokes bebraisa. But then you have a braisa. Remember again, braisa is a compilation of rabbinic teachings which were not codified by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi in the Mishnah. So what do you do with that? Amrlei halacha kistam. In that case, the halacha follows the Mishnah. Right? Rabbi say so again. Here's what's interesting, even though normally we say that if you have first the stam, then a machlokes, the halacha follows the machlokes. If the stam is a mishnah and the machlokes is the braisa, you're going to follow the mishnah. Interesting. Machlokes b'misnisin ustama b'braisa mai. What happens if you have a machlokes and a mishnah and a stam braisa? What does the halacha follow? Amarle, top of Mem Gimel. Amarle v'chi Rabbi lo shana, Rabbi Chia minayin lo. If Rabbi, so the Gemara says, if Rabbi Huda Hanasi did not include it in the Mishnah, Rabbi Chia, who was the Talmud of Rabbi, ultimately, again, would he know halacha l'maisa? In other words, a Mishnah is always going to be more authoritative than a brisa. That's what it comes down to, which makes sense, because a Mishnah is something that is included, was codified, as opposed to a brisa, which was not. Okay. Amr the Gemara says, Amr we learned about it. So now we're just going to go on a little bit of a tangent. And the purpose of this tangent is really just to go ahead and help illustrate some of these principles. So listen to this. Interesting cases. Masrek shel pishtan. I will say you have a flax comb. And a flax comb is exactly as it sounds. A comb for flax. Good, that's it. Masrek shel pishtan. Shenitlu, we'll say sometimes in Yevamos, right, we assume that everything is complicated, right? So when you hear about a flax comb, you're like, okay, but who was it married to, right? Was it married to an ervo? Was it this? Was it that? It's just a comb. That's it. Really, actually, probably better say more like a comb. A comb, good, we'll call it a comb. So Masrek shel pishtan. So you go ahead and you have a comb used for flax. Shenit lashinav. Then I will say, imagine some of the teeth. Right, those are right. That's what we call it. Like the teeth of the comb were removed. But 2 teeth were left in the comb. Tamea, they change it to the Hagos changes to tame. The comb is tame. Now we'll say, let's go back for a second. In order for a utensil to be makabel tuma, what quality does it have to have? Has to be usable. In other words, if a kli is usable in its primary function, then halacha l'maisa it's mekabel tuma. If it's not usable in its primary function, it's not mekabel tuma. So when you have, for example, a flax comb, as long as the Gemara is saying over here is as follows: as long as that comb has at least 2 teeth, then it's usable as a flax comb. If that's the case, then halacha l'maisa it'll be mekabel tuma. Good. So the Gemara says, "Nishtayr bushtayim temeos va'achas Torah." But if it only has 1 tooth left, then it's not really usable as a flax comb anymore, and therefore it's tar. Again, remember, tar meaning what? Tar meaning that halacha l'maisa it doesn't have the status of a flax comb. Not mekabel tuma. Now we'll say the teeth themselves, when they are removed, are mekabel tuma. Now, what's the tooth usable for? So we'll discuss the individual comb teeth could be used to clean out the lantern, or could be used as a hook, as a peg. So the Gemara says, and I both say not a flax comb, but a wool comb. If you have a wool comb and every other tooth of the comb was removed, tar. Ultimately, again, in that case, the comb is really no longer usable, and therefore it's not mekabel tuma. Nishtayru bo gimel b'makom echad tameh. But however, as long as there are 3 teeth for the wool comb left in one place, it's tameh. But if one of the 3 teeth that was left was the outer tooth of the wool comb, then tar. Ultimately, again, it's tar, because apparently, again, the outer tooth is wider than the inner teeth and would not really allow the comb to be fully usable. If you took 2 teeth out of the comb and made it into a pair of tweezers, so it's meos, then ultimately again the tweezers will be mekabel tuma, functional kli. Achos, the skina lener, olimituach tmea. Similarly, if you removed one tooth and used it to clean out a lantern or to spread stuff out on, ultimately, it's mekabel tuma. The kaimalon dein halacha ka'osa mishnah. And I will say, here's what's interesting. Despite the fact that this is a stam mishnah, right? What we just quoted over here, this is all a mishnah, and it's a stam mishnah. I'm sure that attribution. We will say generally, again, when we see a stam mishnah, we assume that what? The halacha follows this mishnah. Yet the Gemara says the kaimalon dein halacha ka'osa mishnah. Yet again, we generally establish halacha doesn't follow this mishnah. Amalei bar minei dahi. Leave this example aside. Rabbi Yochanan Shlosh Amar Tarbayu ein zu mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish both said this was not an accurate Mishnah. Now, my taima, why is this not an accurate Mishnah? Rav Huna bar Manoach, Mished Rav Idi, Bered Rav Ika, Mishum Dekashya Reish L'Seifa. They both say the reason why this is not an accurate Mishnah is because there's a contradiction between the beginning and the end. Diktani, Shelt Semer Shenet Lushin of Achas Mibein Sayim, if you have a wool comb, and every other tooth was removed, tar. Ultimately, again, the comb is tar, which means the comb is no longer a functional kli, and therefore not mekabel tuma. But we learned that, but we can infer from that if two teeth were left in any one place, that ultimately the comb retains its identity and is mekabel tuma. Then you said, nishtayru bo gimel tame. If it has three teeth, ultimately, again, it's tamei. Gimel in, shtayim lo, 2 yes, 3 yes, 2 no. So therefore, again, it's an inherent contradiction in this Mishnah. Is it 3 teeth or 2 teeth which allow the wool comb to remain usable? So apparently, because of this inherent contradiction, both Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish said that halacha l'maisa, this Mishnah is corrupted, and therefore, again, it's not a stam Mishnah. To which the Gemara says, "Oh my kusha, I don't understand why you're getting all worked up about this. Dilma habegavaisa habebraisa. Maybe it all depends whether or not the teeth are left in the inner row or in the outer row. Rather, the Gemara says the reason we think the Mishnah is corrupted is because of the following. Diktani, v'kulan shenitlu achas bifnei atzmon. Tmeos. There we learned that when the teeth themselves are removed, each tooth by itself has the ability to be makabel tuma. Why is that? We'll say why is that? Because ultimately, again, it could be used for some other purpose, right? To clean out the lamp, to stretch stuff out on like a peg. The afagav delo his skina. And I will say this is true. This is true even though what? You have not actively prepared or set aside the item for use as a kli. Se'ema seifa, yet look at the end of that Mishnah. Achos v'hiskina lener, ol lemituach tmeya. You know, if you look at the seifa, what does the seifa say? If you took one of these teeth and you prepared it for use, either to clean out the lamps or to go ahead and use as a peg, ultimately, again, then it's mekabel tuma. And what do we infer from there? Hiskina in, lo hiskina lo. So we'll say this is the inherent contradiction in the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah seems to indicate that any one of the teeth is makabel tuma because de facto it can be used as an independent kli. The end of the Mishnah says the only time the independent teeth are makabel tuma are when they are actively designated. So does the tooth have to be actively designated or not? This seems to be a machlokes. It's not a machlokes, a contradiction. And therefore, again, Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish said this is not a stam Mishnah because the Mishnah itself is corrupted. To which the Gemara once again says, Amar Abaye, oh my kusha, what's the problem? Dilma habekatayu, habelokatayu. Maybe it depends. One is talking about a case where the tooth has a handle. In other words, it has a handle you can hold on to, not like a handle. And the other one is not with a handle. So halacha l'maisa, again, in the handle, it's readily usable even without designation. Without the handle, it's only usable with designation. Okay. Amar Papa says, Umay kushya, dilma habekatnisa haba'alimta. Furthermore, again, it could be talking about different kinds of teeth. One is talking about a thin tooth, a narrow tooth, and one is talking about a wider tooth. So therefore, we'll say, the point the Gemara is making here is as follows. Remember, we just got finished kind of laying out a series of rules. And one of the rules that we put forward was the halacha follows a stam mishnah. Right? Halacha follows a stam mishnah. Good. Now, the Gemara quotes a stam mishnah. Right? Stam mishnah all about wool combs and flax combs. Good. So we'll say, yet, we said the halacha doesn't follow this stam mishnah, which seems to pose a contradiction to our previously stated rule. To which the Gemara says it's not a contradiction, because Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish said this is a corrupted Mishnah. We're trying to figure out what's wrong with it. It looks like a perfectly wonderful Mishnah. So we're posing all of these questions, and the Gemara is saying, no, these aren't questions. Ela mishum dimisaime ba divanki Zudi Rabbi Shimon. So we'll say, no. I'll tell you why. It's not a Stam Mishnah. It's not a Stam Mishnah. Why? Because those, the Davanki or the Davkani, right? Rabbi will say Davkani. What's the word Davkani? Dafka. Dafka. The Davkanim, right? The ones who are more accurate, the way they read this Mishnah, how did the Mishnah end? Zu Divrei Rabbi Shimon. Which means what, Rabbi will say? Which means what? It's not a Stam Mishnah. It's not a Stam Mishnah. It's a Mishnah with attribution. Rabbi will say, by the way, halavai we should be zocha to come into that category, right? A Davkani. A Davkani. Right? Rabbi will say a Davkani is a Davka person. A meticulous person, an accurate person. We'll say it kind of goes back to what we said before, right? What the Gemara was saying before, where who said it? Amrlei Dirama lecha ha lo chash lekimche. You see a theme in today's daf, right? To make sure to go ahead and grind your wheat carefully. To make sure you're very careful before you say something. Make sure your words are accurate. Your words convey the proper meaning, and you're using the proper words. And here you see Dafkani. There's this group of Dafka people, Dafkani, people who are a bit more careful, people who are a bit more meticulous. And I'm both saying it's incredibly amazing that we're learning this stuff here on Pesach, because if you think about it again, the Yom Tov of Pesach fully hinges on what? Davkanos. Never heard that neither before. But Davkanos, being a Dafka Jew, you have to be a detail-oriented individual. And I will say, people often say, the devil's in the details. It's not true. The Ribono Shel Olam is in the details. Because it's the details that make the result either a result of Kedusha or a result of Tumah. It's all about the details. I will say, people sometimes like to say, I'm a big picture person. I don't get involved in the details. I have yet to meet a successful big picture person who doesn't get involved in details. Now, maybe one day a person graduates to not having to manage the details, but someone's always got to be taking care of the details. Because if all I am is big picture and no details, again, I end out churning out unprocessed wheat, not fully ground wheat. There's clumps, there's kernels in it. You have to be a dafkani. You have to be a person, again, who's big picture, but lamaisa, again, attentive to the details as well. So therefore, I will say, it turns out that halacha lamaisa, this Mishnah does not pose a contradiction to our previous conversation for one simple reason. It's not a Stam Mishnah. It has attribution. Beautiful. Shalach li Rabbi Chia bar Abin. So we'll say now we're back to Erusin. We're back to I should say Afchana, waiting 3 months. Shalach Rabbi Chia bar Abin. Ma'arsin toch gimel. V'chein osin ma'isa. So Rabbi Chia bar Abin said, you're allowed to do Erusin within 3 months, and this is what people do. So we'll say, Rabbi Chia bar Abin, and this is the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, right? That Allah ma'isa. You're permitted to do Erusin immediate. After a woman comes off a marriage, she's permitted to do Erusin immediately. What does she have to wait 3 months for? What does she have to wait for? Nisuin. So the Gemara says, then Mishra Michananya, Rabbi Chanina Hagadol, Rubo Shal Rishon, Rubo Shal Shlishi, V'emtzai Shalem. And this is actually very interesting. Rabbi Chanina Hagadol said the truth is, even the waiting of 3 months, you actually don't have to wait 3 months. Rather, what do you need? The majority of the first month, the majority of the third month, and the entire second month. Ameimar shari the aris biyom tishim. Ameimar allowed a woman to do Erusin on the 90th day. So I just want to point out, 3 months, just when the Mishnah uses the word or the term 3 months, what does the Mishnah mean? 90 days. 90 days. Now I will say, so here's what's interesting. So Ameimar allowed a woman to do Erusin on the 90th day. I'm going to Rashi that Meimar. I Rabbi Shmuel Silber Tarvayu. Tzricha lahamtin gimel chadoshim. Chutz miyom shemes bo. V'chutz miyom shenis arsa bo. They said to Meimar, Rabbi Shmuel said you have to wait 90 days. And I will say that's 90 days, not including what? The day the husband died, or whatever, they got divorced. Day that we'll call the day the husband died, and the day of the Erusin. So you need a full 90 days, not including day of death and day of Erusin. So the Gemara says, no. That halacha was said for a nursing mother. For a nursing mother, she has to wait 24 months, not including the day of death of her husband, or I should say, the day that she began nursing, right? And Lamaisa, the day of Erisin. Itmar derav ushmo deritarbayu tzricha lahamtin chavtal lechodesh. She has to wait 24 months. Chutz miyom shenolad bo, not counting the day the baby was born. V'chutz yom shenis arsabo, and not including the day of Erisin. I v'ho hahu da'avitzudas Erisin b'yom tishim. Listen to this. There was a guy, I will say, who wanted to betroth a woman whose husband had passed away, and he made a whole beautiful sudas erisin, and he dafka timed it for what? The 90th day. And what happened? Va'af sidei Rabba l'sudase. And Rabba went ahead and told him, sorry, you can't serve the suda. In other words, you can serve it, but you can't do erisin that day. To which the Gemara says, no. Has sudas nisuin havi. That wasn't a sudas erisin, that was a sudas nisuin. The Hilchasan, I will say, what is the halacha? Tzricha lahamtin chavtal chodesh chutz miyom shenolad bo v'chutz miyom shenis arsa bo u'tzricha lahamtin gimel chadashim chutz miyom shemes bo v'chutz miyom shenis arsa bo. And I will say, this is indeed the halacha lamaisa. Whenever we have these rabbinically mandated waiting periods, those waiting periods are self-contained units of time independent of the, we'll call it the event day and the erisin day. When I say the event days, for example, I will say the need to wait 3 months when coming off a relationship is 3 months, not including the day of death of the husband and the day of the erisin, right? So it's 90 days in between, excluding the event days of death and erisin. And same idea, when a nursing mother has to wait 24 months, that's 24 months independent of the event days, i.e. birth and erisin. And I will say that is indeed how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. If we have time, I'll come back to it. But I will say, well, actually, let's finish up the Gemara. Chutz min almana. So remember again, I will say, Rabbi Yossi paskin that Allah Chalamayse, under normal circumstances, when a woman comes off a marriage, erisin is permitted immediately. Erisin is permitted immediately, with one exception, which was what? The almana. And why can't the almana do erisin immediately? Why not? Avelos, she's in mourning. Says the Gemara, Rav Chisda, Kav Chomer. Rav Chisda said he's arguing Rabbi Yossi. I think it's Kav Chomer that even an almana should be permitted to go and do erisin. Why? What's Kav Chomer? Listen to this. Uma b'makom shasar lechabes mortali ares. Listen to this. In a place where you can't do laundry, right? You are permitted to do erisin. We're going to discuss the halachos of Tisha B'Av, right? Makom shemurtal lechabes eno din shemurtal ares. Certainly, if you're allowed to do laundry, you can certainly get married. An interesting combination there, right? In a place where you're not allowed to do laundry, you can get married. Certainly, in a place where it's mutter to do laundry, you certainly can get married. So, Mai, what are we talking about? This night, here we go. Shabbos shechal Tisha B'Av b'socha. I will say the week that Tisha B'Av falls out on. So this is the week of Tisha B'Av. What's the halacha? Asr lechabes, asr lesaper ulechabes. You're not permitted to go ahead and get a haircut or to launder your clothing. Ubechamishi mutar mipnei kavanah Shabbos. I will say, interestingly enough, if Tisha B'Av falls out on a Friday, which again in our calendar it cannot, but if Tisha B'Av falls out on a Friday, Thursday you are allowed to go ahead and launder and take a haircut. L'kavod Shabbos. The Tanya kodem azman hazeh ha'amematim miskein. I will say we learned in a brayso before this time. I will say we're assuming right now that before this time means the week of Tisha B'Av. The week of Tisha B'Av. Before this time, ha'am mima'atin be'iskehem, people diminish their business dealings. Milisa militain, milivnos v'lintoa, they diminish building activities, planting activities. Uma arsin, but you could still do erisin. Avalo konsin, but you can't do nisuin, you can't get married. Ve'in osin sudas erisin, and I will say, even though we allow you to go ahead and do sudas erisin, do erisin, you can't have a celebratory meal for erisin. I will say, so what do you see from here? Sounds like what the Bryce is saying is that on the week of Tisha B'Av, even though you're not allowed to launder your clothing, you are allowed, and let's say get a haircut, you are allowed to do erisin. The week of Tisha B'Av, the only restriction is you can't do a sudas erisin. So we'll say this is the Kav Chomer. So the Gemara says, in the week of Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to launder your clothing, you're allowed to do erisin. Alachas kama v'kama, when a woman becomes a widow, is she permitted to go ahead after Shiva and launder her clothing? Could she launder her clothing? The answer is yes. So she should be permitted to go ahead and do erisin as well. To which the Gemara says, no. Kitanyahi kodem de kodem. They will say, when we said that you're allowed to go out and do Erisin, that was talking about Kodem de Kodem, not the week of Tisha B'Av, but what? The week before the week of Tisha B'Av. The week before the week of Tisha B'Av. Rashi says, Kodem Azman Azaka, I'm sorry, Kodem de Kodem, last Rashi on the daf, Kodem de Kodem, Kodem Shabbos Shechal Tisha B'Av B'Socha, Dehasa Mutu L'Chabes, Aval Tocha Shabbos Kshem Shas L'Chabes, Kach Asram L'Aris. I'm sorry. When we say that so it's the week, it's not talking about the week of Tisha B'Av, but rather ultimately, again, the week before, to which the Gemara says, Kodem de Kodem. I'm sorry. Amarava v'kodem de kodem nami kavachomer. Ksumeit kavachomer uma b'makom shasali savalitein motali ares. In a situation you're not permitted to go ahead and do business, you are still permitted to go ahead and do erisin makom shemutali savalitein. So therefore, I will say ultimately again, when you are permitted to do business, like for example within shloshim, after a person experiences a loss, ein adin shemutali ares, certainly erisin should be permitted. Lo temad Rabbi Yossi. Omer kol nashim nisarsu, elaima kol nashim yinasu. I will say, could very well be, the Gemara Rava now suggests, Rabbi Yossi ultimately again was not saying you could do erisin. Rabbi Yossi was actually permitted to go ahead and allow women to do nisuin. Nisuin, Amud Beis, the less leil Rabbi Yossi lahavchin. So I will say, how could Rabbi Yossi, so now the Gemara is changing it. The Gemara is suggesting when Rabbi Yossi said in the Mishnah that you're permitted to get married immediately after the one marriage ends, we thought Rabbi Yossi was referring to erisin. But in fact, Rabbi Yossi, an incredible chiddush, he's referring to nisuin. Referring to nisuin. The less leil Rabbi Yossi lahavchin, doesn't Rabbi Yossi require a din of havchana, waiting 3 months before getting remarried? To which the Gemara says, less lay. Rabbi Yossi, it's possible that Allah Lamaisa, Rabbi Yossi does not subscribe to the concept of havchana. He doesn't subscribe to the concept of havchana. He doesn't require a 3-month waiting period. Now, I will say, so again, just to be clear, there's one case, of course, where everyone agrees you have to wait. And when is that? When is that? Yibum. Right? Everyone's going to agree you have to wait. But it could be in other cases, Rabbi Yossi would not require havchana. Now, I will say, ultimately, again, why would Rabbi Yossi not require havchana? It could be that he does not subscribe to that drasha of l'zaracha acharecha that we had in yesterday's daf. Remember again, the whole notion for waiting, right? Aside from yibum, where I have to wait because if she's pregnant, there's no mitzvah of yibum. Not only is there no mitzvah, but Allah wants to be an avera, right? For them, it would be isra eshes ach, it would be arayas. But in other cases, the only reason why we were fixated on determining paternity was for l'zaracha acharecha, to know whose kid is who. It could be that Rabbi Yossi doesn't subscribe to that drasha. The other possibility is liolam islay. No, he does subscribe to the drasha. The ema Rabbi Yossi Omer kol arusos grushos yinasu. Oh, Rabbi Yossi is referring to a very specific case. Rabbi Yossi, when did Rabbi Yossi allow a woman to engage in nisuin immediately? When what? When she was divorced or widowed from erisin. Erisin. Because I will say in erisin, the couple is not living together. If they're not living together, then what? Then Allah said there's no concern that she may be pregnant from another man. If that's the case, ihachi hainu Rabbi Yehuda. If that's the case, I will say, isn't that the same sheet as Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah? Ikebenaihu nisua liares. I will say, here's the difference. The difference would be ultimately, again, a woman who is coming off of nisuin, can she do erisin? Rabbi Yehuda savar nisua mutares liares. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a woman ultimately who's coming off nisuin is permitted to do erisin. Rabbi Yossi savar nisua asura liares. Rabbi Yossi holds that a woman coming off of nisuin is still prohibited to do erisin. The savar Rabbi Yossi nisua asura liares. Does Rabbi Yossi hold that a nisua is not permitted to do erisin? Vatanya, we learned Rabbi Yossi Omer kol nashim yisarsu chutz min ha'almana. Rabbi Yossi says that halacha l'maisa all women are permitted to do erisin except for an almana because of her avelos b'mei ha'ibol. The kama ibol shala. We'll say how long does her avelos last? Shloshim yom. Ultimately 30 days. V'kulan lo yinasu ad shulam gimel chadashim. But again, halacha l'maisa, even Rabbi Yossi is only allowing erusin. But halacha l'maisa nisuin cannot happen for 3 months in order to be able to have havchana, right? To say to determine whether or not she's pregnant. Hi, my kusha. Ilay madik tani Rabbi Yossi Omer kol nashim nisarsu mi alema masnisin du kimna ba'arusas grushos inasu. So we'll say ultimately again, what's the kasha? What's the kasha? Ultimately again, if you have the version that says Rabbi Yossi says that all women are permitted to do erusin, again, would this be any stronger than our Mishnah? And the way we set up our Mishnah is that Rabbi Yossi is referring to arusos gerushos, right? Ultimately, again, a woman who is widowed or divorced from erusin. That's, so the Gemara says, arusos gerushos yinasu. And they're permitted to even do nisuin. Hachanami, call arusos gerushos yinasu. So too, we would see over here that halacha l'maisa, any arusos gerushos are permitted to go ahead and even do nisuin. Ela miseifa. Rather, I will say, must come from the seifa. Diktani, the kulan lo yinasu ad shiu lahen gimel chadashim. Yet I will say, the seifa of the Mishnah said, no women are permitted to engage in nisuin until they have 3 months of havchana. In subehu delo ha isrusei shapir dami. I will say, what are you not allowed to do? Nisuin is asar, but it sounds like what? Erusin is totally permitted. Amarava taritz ve'emahachi. Baba says, okay, here's how you have to go ahead and set this up. Rabbi Yossi Omer, kol arusos grushos yinasu. They will say the sheet of Rabbi Yossi is as follows: any woman who's coming off of erusin, specifically a divorcee, so any woman who was divorced from erusin is what? Permitted to get married, fully married, nisuin, immediately. Why is that? Why is that? No concern of what? Pregnancy, because remember again, they never consummated the marriage. All she had was erusin, with one exception. Chutz min almana, except Rabbi Yosef, woman is widowed. Mipnei ha'ibol, because of avelus, the kama ibol shela, how long does her avelus last for? Shloshim yom, 30 days. Rabbi Yosef, this is very interesting. Now what, according to this version, what Rabbi Yossi just said, any woman who is coming off of a marriage that only got to the erusin stage is permitted to get fully married immediately after the dissolution of her marriage through divorce, right? Why? Because since the previous marriage ended in a state of erusin, there's no fear of pregnancy. Therefore, she's permitted to get remarried, fully remarried immediately. What's the exception? If she's an almana. If she was widowed from erusin, then halacha l'maisa, although she could go ahead and do nisuin immediately, erusin immediately, she can't do nisuin until after the period of avelus. And how long does avelus go for? 30 days. 30 days. So we'll say, so therefore Rabbi Yossi prevents a woman who is widowed from erusin from doing nisuin immediately, but not because of anything to do with havchana. Just to do with what? Just do with what? Avelus. So the Gemara says, now watch this. Unesuos lo yisarsu ad shehei lahen shlosha chadashim. But Rabbi Yossi will agree that if a woman is coming off of nisuin, right, whether because of death or divorce, whether her husband died or she was widowed or divorced, that halacha l'maisa there, you can't do anything for 3 months. So we'll say this is a very different version of Rabbi Yossi we had in our Mishnah. So in this version, let's work backwards. Right? Let's work backwards. Therefore, in this version, halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yossi will say like this: if you were widowed or divorced from nisuin, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? 3 months. 3 months. If you were divorced from erusin, then what? Remarried nisuin immediately. Widowed from erusin, what's the halacha? 30 days. Why 30 days? What is that? What is that? Avelus. Okay? So we'll say, now watch this. Says the Gemara. 1 second. V'amana min ha'erusin mi'isla ibol. So we'll say what this sounds like is that if a woman is widowed from erusin, she has a din of avelus. She has to mourn for her husband. Is that true? So the Gemara says, Ishta arusa lo onin v'lo metamela. So Rabbi said, listen to this. I'm talking about over here a Kohen. Right? Let's say a Kohen had erusin with a woman, and she passed away. The woman passed away during erusin. He's not an onain, right? He doesn't go into avelus for her. nor does he go to her levaya. He does not become tummy for her. V'chein lo onenes v'lo metame lo. So too she does not go into avelus for him, nor does she become tummy for him. Mesa, similarly again, if she dies, eno yarsha, he does not inherit her. Mesu, if he dies, go v'ksuvasa, she gets her ksuva. Now, I will say, now Rashi points out over here, when does she get her ksuva? Only if he decided on his own to commit to it during Erusin. See, I will say, normally, a husband only commits to a ksuva when? From the suin and on. This is a case where he voluntarily committed to a ksuva from Erusin. That's fine. If he voluntarily committed, then halacha l'maisa, he has to pay it. But we'll say, what do you see from here? Again, what's the takeaway from here? There is no avelos during Erusin. We just got finished saying that according to Rabbi Yossi, if a woman was widowed during Erusin, she has to wait 30 days before getting remarried because of avelos. Why is there any avelos from Erusin? To which the Gemara says, Ela Tanoihi. It's machlokes Tanoim. Listen to this. The Sanya, I will say it's fascinating how this comes back to Tisha B'Av. The Sanya, Mirosh Chodesh V'adatainis, from Rosh Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av. So ha'am mimatin mi'eskehen. So the people diminish their business dealings. Milisa v'litin, to do business. Milivnos, building. Lintoa, planting. Umile ares umilisa. And from Erusin and Nisuin. Right? That's from Rosh Chodesh. Shabbos Shechal Tisha B'Av B'socha, the week of Tisha B'Av itself, what we call Shvur Shechal Bo, Asr L'Schaper L'Chabes. You cannot go ahead and get a haircut, launder. V'Asr L'Ares, you can't do Erusin. V'Yesh Omrim Kol HaChodesh Asr. And others say the entire month of Av is Asr in all of these things. Maskef Ravashi. Ravashi says, so the point over here is, Maskef Ravashi, Mimad the Ares Mamish. How do you know that when we say that on the week of Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to do Erusin? How do you know that means Erusin? I will say maybe Erusin is permitted. What does it mean when it says you're not allowed to do Erusin? Maybe that means maybe that only refers to what? Making a Su'uda Erusin, a celebratory meal. So the which the Gemara says, Hali Ari Shaper Dami, but actually doing Erusin itself should be permitted. Ihachi Melisa Linase Nami Leme Avesu. That's Nisuan Huda Aser. Halisa Shaper Dami. Well, if that's the case, why don't you say that halacha l'maisa? The same way that when it says Nisuan is Aser, maybe Nisuan is really mutter. What's Aser the week of Tisha B'Av? Right? Only a Sudas Nisuan. Hachi Ashta B'Shlama Nisuan below Suda Ika Simcha. So here's the difference. Nisuin by itself without a simcha, without a suda, there's still joy. Erusin below suda, mi ika simcha. But I will say Erusin without a suda, there's no real celebration attached to that. Ravashi, sheni avelus chadasha me avelus yishana, v'sheni avelus terabim me avelus tiyachid. So I will say this is actually quite profound. The Gemara says the truth is you can't really go ahead and bring a comparison between Tisha B'Av, right, the halachos of Tisha B'Av or the week of Tisha B'Av, and personal avelos. Why? Because there is a distinction ultimately again from what we'll call historical mourning to contemporary mourning, and between public mourning to personal mourning. If you look at Rashi, we'll say that's Rashi in the Mishnah. Rashi lo tugma ketanai Rabbi Yossi mode bahi de ma'arsin udekash lekal kavachomer hushayni ben avelos chadasha de Tisha B'Av tavi avelos yishana va'avelos terabim hilchach kila. I will say the halachos of Tisha B'Av are going to be different and to a certain degree a bit more lenient than the halachos concerning personal mourning. We wanted to create a bridge between the halachos of Tisha B'Av and the halachos of personal mourning. Kamash Nabo said that there is a distinction. Tisha B'Av represents communal, historical mourning, and ultimately, again, what's happening with Yamana is personal, contemporary mourning. And at the end of the day, those are two different entities and are governed by two different sets of halachic mandates. So I will say, bottom line, halacha l'maisa, how do we paskin all of this? So I will say, we paskin the Shulchan Aruch. This is in Even HaEzer. Simin Yud Gimel Sif Ala says, it's too long to get into right now, but what I will say is like this. We paskin, any woman coming off of a relationship, whether she's coming off of Erusin, whether she is coming off of Nisuin, has a 3-month waiting period. It does not make a difference whether she's young, whether she's old, she's a katana, she's a gedola, she's a zakena. It makes no difference. She can become pregnant, can't become pregnant. Husband was capable of making her pregnant. Doesn't make a difference. I will say it is a low plug across the board. So whether she's coming off of Erisin, whether she's coming off of Nisuin, halacha lamaisa, she has to wait 3 months. And I will say that 3 months ultimately again, it is 90 days excluding the event days. So it does not include the day of death, day of divorce, and day of Erisin. So halacha lamaisa, 90 days in the middle for all women. I will say we'll stop here. Shkoyach.